about how to access that.
All right. So how long has it been since you've called?
Oh, maybe about 3 months, give or take. It's
Hmm,
been a while.
okay.
I mean,
Yes.
honestly, the truth is, in most moments, I feel like I know the way. I'm not always on the right track, but when I am, I know that I am. And there hasn't
That's
been. Sorry, go ahead.
no. You go ahead.
Well,
Mm.
I was just gonna say, well, like I said, I've been working on abandoning the hindrances, and um, I've been having success with that, and the process feels straightforward at this point, to the point where I don't have too terribly many questions. However, one question I do have is, once I get my mind to a point where the hindrances are more or less gone, how do I then turn it to knowledge and vision? As in, is there a specific method, or is it something that just naturally arises?
Yes, it is. It does not naturally arise.
Okay.
That in fact, if you have actually stumbled on to asking an extraordinarily important question, which would be
That
what's the
indeed.
difference between the mundane and the supermundane?
Mhm.
Another way of asking the questions, what's magic and what's real? Another way of asking that question is what is noble and what is not? What is ordinary? In other words, this is the stepping point of the most profound aspect.
Yeah.
But the first thing that I would like to say is to back up to the original statement that we're the point where we were inviting each other back and forth. What I was going to say then is that um, it is such the case that in fact you're practicing exactly right, and you know that it's right because you know that it's right. That's part of what's going on here.
I know that it's right because it works.
Exactly so. And that's what the eradication of the doubt is all about
Mm.
in that first small group of fetters.
Yeah.
You know that there's 10 main fetters, and when you're getting
Mhm.
past the first three, that you're in soda pine level. Well, you're already experimenting with one of the most important ones, and that is that knowledge actually crushes doubt.
Yeah.
But you need something like a hammer and an anvil, or maybe even a huge vice or something, to actually grasp that nut of thinking we know what we know, in and turning that into direct knowledge, in the sense that now we actually do know that
Mhm.
there's no belief left in it. It's all been boiled out, or at
Yeah.
least we've boiled out a sufficient amount of belief and doubt, so that now we've got good, hard, solid evidence of this is the path, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
Um, and that in fact, where I the way that I look at it is through the seven stages, and this method that I'm talking about, actually, the word stage is not used, but it's talked about in the sense of the first knowledge and the
Oh, the
second
insight knowledge.
and the second knowledge and the third knowledge. And what I see you now is that firmly grasping the first knowledge, stepping directly into the second knowledge, you're now asking me the question of what is the third knowledge?
I missed what the first two were.
I know I'm about to review them for you so that you can say check, check. All right?
Okay. 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 Go ahead.
All right. In other words, what I'm doing is that I'm verifying for you
Mhm.
what you're already experiencing, and the question that you're asking is the appropriate question at the place that you are.
Okay.
In other words, you're falling bootstrap, left, right, path, right down the path of Sotapan, just like the Buddha had laid them out. And
Good.
that first, yes, and that first knowledge is stated as, no matter how obstructed the mind is, that the mind can be cleaned out, and the mind can be brought back to this present moment to see how things are right now. Now that's a it's actually a mixture of a direct quote with some additions.
Yeah.
But the word obstruction is the word used here, and before that statement in the sutta, before that, the 5 hindrances were in fact listed. Just to get everybody on the right page that what we're talking about here is hindrances now, and then the first knowledge is directly about the hindrances in the sense of obstructions. Now, when we talk about obstructions, we're actually talking about a little bit in a wider viewpoint than hindrances that are experienced momentarily in the mind when the mind is being trained. And so the mind wanders away, it'll wander away into hindrance. So that's the way that we talk about hindrances, and there's 5 of them. But there's a deeper way of talking about hindrances, especially when we think of them as obstructions, because we don't spend a lot of time on the cushion trying to get the hindrances out of the mind. They're obstructions when they prevent us from living a happy life. And sometimes they really get into the way, and that students in the beginning can see that, oh, sitting on the cushion, I can get these hindrances out. But the reason that that's true is because of a bit of seclusion.
Yeah.
So where obstructions are the hindrances in the mind that arise out of the mind, as well as all of the hindrances arise from the senses directly in the sense of putting up with the world. An example of that is if you've got a pretty girl on one side of you and a big heavy gorilla kind of man is really angry at you on the other side of you, you can't pay attention much to either one of them because there's just too much happening. And we get all confused. And in fact, that particular state of mind that I'm talking about is the state of mind of confusion that is doubt itself at its ultimate limit. That's why I gave you such a clear example of it. But I have seen that recently in politics. I saw just a little bit because they wanted to show it over and over again. But what I honed on to was the reaction of this politician when confronted with something that was opposite of something that he had just said. And he was confused. I mean, he froze. He actually won the election, and I wonder why. Any of his constituents could look at him and say, I don't want this guy for a governor, not if he's going to fall into these kind of mental states when he should be up for the game. I mean, he was clearly out of it. He had lost his mind literally. He was, like that.
Yeah.
So that's what happens when we're completely filled with doubt, when we're completely confronted with contradictions. But knowledge that you're talking about is the ability now to start to cut through those kind of things.
Yeah.
Because you know that you can see. You have the ability, it's like no matter how obstructed the mind is, you can come back to what's going on right now and pay attention to what's going on. And you know that. That's the first knowledge, and that's the clearing up of that level of doubt. The kind of doubt that'll throw you into a state of confusion. You're not going to, congratulations, you'll probably never get confused again. That
That's
you'll
good.
go into a state of not knowing, but it's the fact that you're not sure because you know that you don't have the right information you need to see what's going on. And
Right. So
that's
you can be
completely
clearly
different.
aware that you don't know.
Yes,
And that clear
exactly.
knowing is the opposite of doubt.
Exactly. Clear knowledge that you don't know is exactly opposite of doubt.
So doubt is more like when you're so lost you don't even know how lost you are.
It can be. You can get so lost in doubt that you don't
Hmm.
even know it. And in fact, that's
Yeah.
why people have belief systems, is because it's too painful and too confusing to live in the state of not knowing. And so
Yeah.
they'll invent something that works most of the time.
Hmm.
Okay, a clear example of that was is that Newton was so on to gravity that he actually had to codify it.
Yeah.
But the way he codified it worked most of the time,
Hmm.
but
It
not
worked for what he
enough.
knew.
Pardon?
I said it worked for what he knew. It doesn't work for stars and planets, but he didn't know about all that.
Actually, the way of stating it correctly is he didn't know about gravity when it was really dense. Okay, it's really dense gravity is where Newton's formulas break down.
Yeah.
That's why the way that they discovered it was is that the um, Mercury does not in fact fit Newtonian's laws of physics.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
No, it took the general relativity about and the heaviness of the gravity to get the kinks worked out of it, and that's what gives us now GPS.
Oh, do,
Newtonian,
do you mean the planet Mercury or the element Mercury?
no, the planet Mercury. The
Oh, okay.
planet
Okay. Okay. Okay.
the planet Mercury revolving around the sun
Hmm.
does not fit Newtonian's laws of gravity.
Right.
And I can tip it to you.
Yeah.
F is equal to g times mass 1 times mass 2 divided by the square of the distance between them. That's the formula. And it doesn't work in all cases. The heavier the,
Yeah.
in fact, is the problem is that the g of gravity, the gravitational constant, actually changes depending upon the density of the gravity.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get too far deep into physics, but it's one of my favorite topics. Up there to the mathematical level, as you can tell. So
Yeah.
on the but what that meant was that we could not see clearly with Newton's formula for gravity. But once we get general relativity, once Einstein comes in and fixes us and gives us a better equation or gives us a better lens to look at it, now we can see really clearly. We can clearly see what the orbit of Mercury actually is and a whole
Right.
lot of other stuff. We can't
Mm.
actually see where we are on the planet Earth because of the GPS system.
Right.
In that regard, Buddhism and science are precisely the same thing.
Hmm.
When we clean up that doubt, that means we're clearing up the confusion. We're clearing up the. You also know about the modern telescopes. I mean, when I started first studying astronomy, we really were like looking through a dirty pane of glass.
Yeah.
But with the Hubble, everything gets really crystal clear. We can really see what's going on. Okay, that's exactly what we're talking about. Is that over time and with more and more knowledge or more and more cleansing of the mind, you get a very very clear idea, not idea, a very clear understanding, direct knowledge of what's going on.
Hmm.
All right, and that's especially true now when you get to that second one is when you can get the mind clear and keep it clear. Now it's fit for work. And when I say keep it clear, the keep in there has then to do with how useful or how long it will be useful to have that mind that's fit for work.
Hmm.
And by exercising that mind fit for work with the right weights, then that will grow. All right, that's the same way as cleaning or everything. So you can see how that works. But the important thing is that we take on um, the right thing. Okay, and the way the Buddha talks about that is what's appropriate. He uses the word appropriate. What's, and another word to use would be worthy. What is it worthy of you spending your the time of your mind on?
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
things are worthy of your attention?
Yeah.
Okay, because there's three ways of doing it. One is that we don't really have the control of paying attention, which is the ordinary mind, and we've just passed through that. Now that we're up to the state that we can in fact control the mind, keep it fit for work, or we're going to now pay close attention to the things that are unworthy of attention, or are we going to pay attention to those things that are worthy of attention?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. And we can tell the difference between what's worthy and unworthy, or what's appropriate and not appropriate, based upon the fact that if we pay attention to those things that are not worthy of paying attention to, then not much changes and suffering remains around. But if we start paying attention to that things which are appropriate to attention, wise attention, then things improve. And that's
Yeah.
part of the knowledge that we're talking about, is paying
Mm-hmm.
wise attention to things, and then it you can see things, start avoiding them.
Right. That reminds me of a sutta I've been thinking about. I forget which exactly one it is, but I'm sure you're quite familiar with it. It's the one where he's talking about the difference between skillful and unskillful thinking, and about how if you were to sit down for a night and a day and think a skillful thought, there would be no ill effect. There might actually even be a beneficial effect, other than the fact that it would tire the mind out. And that's when he
Mhm.
learned how to just stop thinking altogether. But then that's the part that throws me, because I can come into a place of stillness, but it doesn't seem to be a voluntary. It's not something I do. It's something that just happens. And in the moment, I can appreciate it and try to reinforce that. But I don't seem to. I don't really see any method, as you would say, of getting to that place.
Actually, the method is getting close to and closer to the edge, and then when you fall in, it's a mistake.
That
All right.
makes sense.
All right. Now, yeah, it's like going over. Nobody, when they go over the edge, they do it on purpose
Yeah.
because they think that it's downhill. They think that there should be a halfway point.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, and there's not. Is that it is much more to do with getting close to the edge.
Mhm. Okay.
And
And
okay, and
then
then when you
falling
get
in is
close,
an accident.
and then falling in is the accident, and that happens with nibbana.
So then there's also an
That's
element of
part of the
trust that the
reason
accident
why
will
it's.
take place.
I'm sorry. What?
I said, so then there's also an element of trust that the accident will take place after you've been there a few times.
But that trust then was what you started in the beginning. Now it's beginning to be seen as knowledge
From direct experience.
from direct experience.
Mhm.
Okay, so and so now you're wanting a little more. You're saying, yes, this is it. This is delicious. I really appreciate that fork tip full of spicy goodie. I want a spoonful now.
Well, I mean, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So we're off onto the topic of what's appropriate.
Right, 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 right.
All right. And then actually, I want to go so far now that I've gotten you into this sutta to actually read this verse in it because somehow the suttas have a power to them so that when you
Mhm.
see the sutta, it really grabs you.
Yeah.
The word is attend that he's using here. When he attends wisely, He attends wisely to these. This is suffering. He attends wisely. This is the origin of suffering. He attends wisely. This is the cessation of suffering. And he attends wisely. This is the way that leads to the end of suffering. When he attends wisely in this way, three fetters are abandoned in him. One, personality view. Two, doubt. And three, adherence to rites, rules, and rituals. These are called the three taints that should be abandoned in him. Okay? Those are the three fetters. And I will walk you through those three fetters one by one in great depth if you want to call back and learn about them.
Okay.
But you can learn all about them all on your own, but it'll take a while because you have to discover. It's more or less, are you going to learn your way around town with a decent enough map? Or are you just going to wing it and just go out there and find things? So, what we're really saying is the answer to your question in great depth is that now is the time for you to start paying close attention to the Four Noble Truths. And when I say close attention, I mean pull them apart. Really begin to understand the nature of suffering in your mind and with everybody else. And there's many different ways of doing that, including when you see somebody angry, stop seeing them as angry and start seeing them as in suffering. Start recognizing the suffering. Start recognizing, in fact, the hindrances that you have been good at sweeping out the door are, in fact, suffering.
Yeah.
And when they become full of obstructions, they really are suffering.
Yeah.
So we have to see all of this nature of suffering. Wanting things that we don't have is suffering. A really good example of that is wanting enlightenment. Wanting to be enlightenment is an uneasy state to be. And yet enlightenment is a very happy state to be in. Why? Because we don't want anything satisfied.
It's like a Chinese finger trap.
Exactly so. Exactly so. You do, in fact, have to push in and give it some space and then zip and out they go. But if you pull, exactly. You call it a finger trap, huh? We called them Chinese handcuffs when I was a kid, but then Oklahoma is racist in every possible way I know.
In North Carolina, it's the same way.
Exactly so. Exactly. I know. I've been there and done that with both places.
Yep.
But Chinese handcuffs, that's even more racist than finger trap.
Yeah.
So, and it may have been just time. The second thing is that when we come to understand, in fact, that first knowledge that we just spoke about, the knowledge of no matter how obstructed the mind can be, I can in fact free it and come out. That's an important place to be, because in fact it's also taking responsibility for things the way that the second noble truth is actually going to teach you when you get deep into the second noble truth. And the second noble truth is really, really best investigated with that mind that's fit for work. So that we can really get to the point of understanding is, where is the source of suffering? It comes from I want.
Yeah.
I want. If I'm in a state of want, then I'm suffering. It comes from the state of get out, I don't want, I want you out of here. That's also the source of suffering. In fact, it goes right down to feelings. I like it, I don't like it. And when I'm not really conversant with those feelings, when I don't really see them clearly, then that's ignorance, the really big issue of the second noble truth. So, in fact, much of the second noble truth has to do with the investigation and inspection of our feelings so that we begin to be really knowledgeable about them and start removing that ignorance.
Okay, may I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
So, what you just said reminds me of a sort of paradox that's been on my mind recently, being when I'm working on getting rid of the hindrances, I have to do it in a way that involves not disliking the hindrances, because that would just be another hindrance. And sometimes it just kind of seems to
Good
happen on its
point.
own. Well, sometimes it just kind of seems to happen on its own, but then other times I'm kind of confused about how I just did that. It kind of just seems to be a spontaneous result of practice, I guess you could say, but in any given specific moment, I might not actually know how to do it because I feel too lost in disliking the hindrance as I'm trying to get rid of it.
Ah, yes, that's interesting. Let's look at that just a little bit. And that is that when anger or disliking comes, basically from the attitude or the existential life position that the hindrance is more powerful than I am, that it's to blame for my suffering right now. And therefore,
Mm-hmm.
I have the right to be angry at it and try to harm it back. I'm going to take revenge on that hindrance, okay? But that's that's the normal way of thinking. But in
Yeah.
fact, if we take the winner's position, we're no longer victims of that hindrance. We can basically look at it like a rat or a mouse that's in the house. Aha, I see that mouse. I saw it. And that now that I've seen it, I have things that I can do about it. But if I don't see that mouse in the house, okay, so that's basically the way that we see that, and that in that regard, that hindrance that just flew by the mind, that I saw it, because I saw it, I took power over it. And now
Right,
I'm in
and that
control.
that it helps to distinctly, deliberately recognize that as a moment of success. And another thing that I've noticed in my own practice
Exactly
that
so.
helps, another thing that I've actually noticed that helps is remembering to have compassion for myself for being stuck in that hindrance, because that actually is a moment of suffering.
Yes, it is.
Instead of
And
myself
not
like, oh, I'm
liking that
doing it
hindrance
wrong,
is
I'm
even
stuck in
more
this.
suffering.
It's okay. Everybody gets stuck in doubt. Everybody gets stuck in anger and ill will. Just do your best. I find that that's the best attitude to have.
Exactly. You're coming right along. So now you're already, and see, you were beginning to do it naturally, and you didn't even need my guidance. So you're already right in there in the second noble truth, but at least now you know that what you're doing is on the map the Buddha laid
Mhm.
out.
Right.
Okay? That in fact the Four Noble Truths um is it really is a roadmap, and it's quite detailed, and it's got a lot of stuff in it.
Hmm.
And
And it
that in
always
fact,
comes back to the Four Noble Truths.
and everything comes back, and in fact you could just package it all together as the Four Noble Truths, and then you can tie it with the bow of just three words: dukkha, dukkha nirodha, suffering and its melting. Melting. So, in fact, melting is possibly the best way of using it. So it's suffering and melting suffering.
Mm.
Because the word melting also has the quality of nibbana in the sense of cooling things off. Things are
Right.
cool, that they're not hot. That what's hot burns. The hot sun, a hot fire, a hot mind, a hot heart, all of those are part of dukkha.
I also really like the word melting because the imagery of it works on a certain level. Because with cessation, or I don't know. Okay, so for blowing out, there's a feeling of effort, but with melting, it's more like it just dissolves and goes away.
But that's exactly what we're talking about with these little nibbana moments that you're talking about, that you kind of fall into it. That's the melting. When you take the heat
Mm-hmm.
off, things cool down. Those are the little nibbanas. So you want to make note of those.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what causes heat?
Right.
Hindrances cause heat.
Right.
So when you're free from the hindrances, now you're in a state, and you should begin to recognize how cool that feels. And in
Yeah.
fact, this now we're talking about the third noble truth that you need to start working on. You need to experience this third noble truth, this cooling off process, this melting down of the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Taking it now that you're taking it out of the mind, you should be able to see some of the benefits of to be able to come to this present moment, take a deep sigh breath, and really enjoy the heck out of being alive in that instant.
Yes. Yes.
And then you can reflect how marvelous it is that I know the Dhamma.
Yeah.
What amazing it is just to be in the Dhamma. And so this is a way of start experiencing the third noble truth. And we possibly already been working on the fourth noble truth of the way, because the way is actually the practice that you've already been practicing, in the sense that you know that this cool place is better than a hot mind, and that's one's noble right view. And so
Mm-hmm.
having that right view as a starting point now with each practice, the important skill to be developed is sati, to remember, to remember to come out of the hindrances into right view. To do that takes effort. Your effort is getting less and less now. It's gotten easier and easier to come out of the hindrances, not quite so much effort anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're beginning to understand that, yes, that it's actually becoming easier and easier to come out of the hindrances into right view. And in the process, you're gaining the right attitude. Well, that's the those are the four items of the Eightfold Noble Path that you have to start practicing right from the very beginning. And the fifth one, which is actually number 8 on the list, is the unification of mind. When you come into that, isn't this really nice? That's a very nice way of looking at the fact that the mind is now unified. It's at peace. It's relaxed. It's satisfied. It's content. And it's knowledgeable about what is. And so
Yeah,
the
you know,
Eightfold Noble Path is right there.
I had a brief experience of that, actually just driving down the road the other day, and the way I was framing it at the time was it felt like truth and just blatant honesty. And it turns out, I didn't realize this before, but it turns out that in most moments, there's a very subtle, almost subconscious feeling that my mind is lying to me. It's not telling the truth. But in this moment, that feeling went away, and what was left was actual, frank honesty with how things are.
That's a good way of saying it. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. Well, by staying then with that state, the original question you ask is, now that I've got this shiny new toy, what am I going to do with it? The answer is, we're going to put it on the path. Going to put it on a racetrack. Only we don't use the word race, because either way you use the word race is not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But we are going to put it on the track,
Okay.
put it on the path. So see dukkha when it's there. See it in yourself, seeing it in others, seeing it on the outside, see it on the inside. Recognize it. Recognize it as self created. Wherever you see the sufferer is the one who created the suffering. That's
Right.
always the case. Never is that not true. The
Mm-hmm.
sufferer creates the suffering. That's the second noble truth, and it's noble because it's always the case. We are
Yeah.
never the victim of anyone. I walked into that dentist office. How can I blame him for what happened? Or how I feel. That's taking responsibility. But you can also see that taking responsibility for one's life is like becoming a lion. We have to become very successful in life to be able to trust that we are the one, in fact, in charge of the situation now. We're no longer the victim, nobody to blame.
Right. So here's a point of confusion.
Okay?
What you've been describing about investigating suffering and investigating when suffering goes away and acknowledging that as a moment of success and all that, that's essentially how I've been abandoning the hindrances. But earlier you said that that and applying your mind to knowledge and vision are actually two different things. Or am I misunderstanding you?
I'm not sure what you're asking yet. Knowledge, you use knowledge and okay. Give me a second chance.
Okay, round two. You ready? All right,
Round two.
so
Okay.
all right. So at the very beginning, when I called you, my question was once you get the hindrances out of the mind and you throw all of that stuff out, in the suttas it says, with the mind thus purified, I then turn my mind to knowledge. And I asked you how to do that. And if I understand you correctly, the answer you've been giving me essentially involves investigating suffering and how it goes away. But that's
Hmm.
actually how I've been abandoning the hindrances. So how is that
But
process
are
different
they?
from?
How are they different? How is the hindrances not suffering, and how is suffering not a hindrance?
They are. Well, that was my point of confusion, is because for a second I thought you were saying that they're actually two different processes. So I probably just
No, they
misunderstood
are.
you.
No, they are deeply interrelated.
Okay.
Deeply interrelated. However, suffering is, let us say, at a more expanded time frame reference,
Okay.
so that hindrances are very, very short duration because it's only what the mind is doing in this particular moment.
But suffering refers more to the habit.
Yes, or let us
Okay.
say this particular cycle of the mind,
Mm-hmm.
this particular cycle of the mind. All right, but dukkha is when there is a lot of cycling in the mind. The more cycling there is, then the more dukkha there is.
Right.
And there's a sequence of events that when the mind moves from merely I don't like it into I can't stand it into you're dead meat to me. Okay, you can see how that cycling gets deeper and deeper and deeper into suffering.
It's like an onion. It goes
Yes,
on, and there's an eye in the middle.
yes, that's a way of looking at it. Precisely, precisely. That's. I'm more likely am using the word I in the sense of a bucket that we carry our suffering in.
Mm-hmm.
But in this idea of cycling through, it's more like the gravity that that grabs the ball at the top of the thing and throws it down again. But
Yeah.
there are many different ways of looking at it. These are all examples of who said it best was Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, when the first line is the Tao that can be said is not the true Tao.
So that
One of the
refers to the
ways,
wisdom of silence, going to that silent place.
no, I'm talking about everything. The Dhamma. The Dhamma that can be said is not the real Dhamma. What we're talking about now of the distinction between hindrances being one kind of dukkha, but there's other or grander dukkhas and things like that, and giving examples is the example of using words to define something that cannot be defined in words. It's a concept that I have to create with words and give to you in words, but you got to take all of the words out of it and see what your mind is actually doing. And that's precisely what we are. So I'm, in a way, trying to do catch up ball.
Excuse me, you're starting to break up a whole lot, and I'm barely understanding what you're saying, so I'm gonna switch to audio only.
Okay.
Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can still hear you. Is my audio better now?
Yeah, you're clear now.
Oh, good. That happens.
Okay,
Okay.
so I actually didn't catch any of that explanation
All
about the
right.
Tao Te
What
Ching.
the Tao Te Ching, the first line is the Tao that can be said is not the Tao.
Right.
And what that means is that many of these deeper mental processes, or in fact a whole lot of stuff, we cannot, even with language, adequately describe it. That things are
Mm-hmm.
too complicated. Sometimes they're even too complicated to hold into the mind. But when we
Mm-hmm.
try to convey it, all we've got to convey it with is language, and language is not adequate to convey many of these things.
Right.
And what we're saying, there's another way of saying it, and that is that stop sucking my finger and look at what I'm pointing at. I'm pointing at the moon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ha- Have you ever heard of that one? Okay, so
I
that's an
haven't heard it
example.
put it quite that way.
So, we can only point to these things.
Right.
I can't give you an exact. So normally within Buddhism, what we do is we try to give sometimes a very heavy example of something. And I've done that with you. Give you a very, very clear example.
Mm-hmm.
One example would be like having a really big angry man on one side and a pretty girl on the other, and you can't really pay attention to either one of them. That's a really heavy duty example of that. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, this is one of the ways of speaking, but the reality is that that confused state that we're talking about doesn't really require an angry man and a pretty girl. It happens in many different contradictions, and we're caught often in contradiction. And generally, the contradictions that we're caught in is the contradiction between what I'm actually seeing right now, and number two, what I thought I'd see.
Mm-hmm. So expectations versus reality.
Expectations would be another example of that. Yes. Um, I have heard an expanded line of Jesus that fits really well. I like it. And that is, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Now, that's Jesus's one. But the third
Mm-hmm.
line is, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. But first, it will piss you off. And so we use these examples to try to cut through that so that the students will have a closer expectation. Um, and in fact, um, one of the qualities that Westerners play with when they talk about Buddhism is they try to attribute something like a dark night of the soul. Have you ever heard that in reference to Buddhism, or do you have a? Normally, it's an old Catholic reference.
Yeah, people talk about it on our stream entry all the time.
Yes. Well, guess what? If the student is properly prepared, he's not going to have that dark night of the soul, which I just said is at first it's really going to piss you off.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think of it like that, is that if the student is really well prepared for seeing an atta, that's normally where the people have a really dark night. Another place is um, through investigation of what I would call um, the four instincts, but the Buddha would call it the four modes of clinging. That second mode of clinging is materialism. And that's one of the places where we begin to get really disgusted with the world. And so that's why it's really valuable to see the world as suffering rather than um, as a disgusting liar, because that's what we normally think of it. When we begin to see the world, we see it as disgusting because it's been lying to me.
Right.
So we begin to blame the outside world. And a much better way of being disgusted with the world is the Pali term atamayata, which means, I don't want to have anything to do with that. It's the difference, I would say, in America between someone looking at Donald Trump with great disgust, great hate, great animosity, and great fear over the possibilities of what he's going to do next,
Mm-hmm.
versus someone who can look at Donald Trump and say,
I think I see what you mean.
and you can see that most people in the U.S., when they begin to look at Donald Trump, they say, oh no, catastrophe. Let's impeach him, let's impeach him. Oh, it's crazy. But if they see him as the real nincompoop that he really is, then, quite amazing. Coming on 30 days of shutdown.
Yeah.
Quite amazing. So, anyway, back to the Dhamma. We begin to look at, investigate, and see these four aspects of um, dukkha, the dukkha and dukkha nirodha, the melting away, and how by following the path over and over again, constantly and correctly removing whatever fire there is, then eventually everything cools down to a really nice, cool, easy, relaxed state of mind. And that when something comes up, we know it really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's anxiety. That I really like being completely free from it, and it used to run my life. One of the
Yeah.
ways it ran my life was that I was in a hurry.
Mm.
And I'm talking about in a life's way, and I've got so many examples, including racing to the front of the room of the math class to make sure that I was the first one to hand in the pop quiz. And on one occasion, I also ran back up a second time, grabbed the page, recognizing that I'd made a mistake. The whole class was laughing at me. And still, I was able to make that correction and get the paper back up on the desk first. All right.
Yeah.
Why, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that it comes from my dad, because my dad was a meter reader and a fast walker. And as a
Yeah.
little kid, it was hard for me to keep up with him. So I spent my whole life racing.
Yeah.
And it wound up with a huge knot of anxiety in the chest. Now that I have, and I knew about it even when I was studying psychology, it was only with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was I was able to figure out how to relieve myself of that torture and to come out of it. So now that I'm completely free, or at least feels completely free most of the time of that, that when it comes up, I feel it really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Can see it
Yeah.
really quick.
I've had some experience with anxiety, and there are sometimes I can breathe deeply into it and relax, and other times it seems to be the case that the best I can do is just be okay with the fact that I'm feeling that. So is that a viable, legitimate technique, or should I actually be trying to get rid of it?
Yes, those two things are number one and number two. I'll leave that with you. Number third thing to do is take another deep breath and start again. Step one and step two and step one and step two. And every time that you do that, that anxiety will go down a little bit. Even when you're, and in fact, you do want to bring it to the state that you're satisfied with the way that it is. And
Mm-hmm.
then take another deep breath, start again, and come even more satisfied with the way that it is.
So it's good enough, and it can also get better.
Yes, precisely.
I'm gonna have to let that one sink in a little bit. Just being completely honest.
How in the world are you going to develop the skill of satisfaction if you don't practice it on things you're dissatisfied with? Because that's all you've got to practice it on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's got to be good enough.
Yes, that's the whole quality of Idiopata. I was so amazed, even after all of those years with the Anapanasati Sutta, to go back and realize that the Buddha had put that line in there.
What line?
The development of the power.
I'm not familiar.
Yes, I have already given it to you. Idia and
Mm-hmm.
Idiopata.
You're right.
Okay, the bases of power. The four bases of power wind up being the four aspects of the Eightfold Noble Path. The first one, right view, which is listed in the sutras as investigation. The power of
Okay.
investigation, or
I gotcha.
investigation basis of power. All
Yeah.
right, effort, right effort is the basis of power. Mindfulness or sati, basis of power. All right. Seeing clearly things as they are is the basis of power. That's one's right view or right attitude. And so, with these four aspects of the Eightfold Noble Path, working in concordance with each other as we're practicing Anapanasati, begin to build the power. So, what are the powers? The power of success, the power of um, satisfaction, the power of safety, security, comfort. Satisfaction is really a big deal in there, to be satisfied with the way that it is. And
So
that's
we've
what
got
you were asking me.
yes, I did it. We've got it's okay the way it is, and we've got I'm okay,
Hmm.
essentially. Okay.
Yes. And that things are not dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Are the hindrances dangerous?
The hindrances are dangerous, but right now we're free from hindrances. And this
Ah.
And this is the roar of the lion. I can handle this. I can do it. I don't need to blame anybody. Now, I'm going to add one more item to that list of idia and idiopata. Idiopata are the four first steps of the Eightfold Noble Path. And idia itself means power. And the power itself is the power of success, the feeling of being satisfied, the feeling of being safe and secure. All right, all of these things together is imagine that you have been the head of the pride, the lion. You've just tackled a young gazelle, and you're taking the first bite out of that gazelle, and you're roaring with satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. There's a sutta that's been really helpful to me recently. I'm sure you're quite familiar with it, but it compares each of the hindrances to a different dangerous situation, such as wandering through the desert or being in slavery, etc. And then it compares being free of the hindrance from being free of that situation. And I find that it's a pretty good analogy because it describes what the feeling is without actually naming the feeling. And it leaves it up to interpretation a little bit, and each interpretation is useful and valid. So, for example, you can consider that a feeling of success, or you could also consider it a feeling of relief and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there's also the thought, this is it, this is right.
Exactly so.
There's that feeling
By
of
the way,
security.
that one of the places that that list exists is in Sutta number 39.
Mm-hmm.
And the 5 items on that list are being getting out of jail, getting
Right.
out of the hospital or getting well, getting out of debt, uh, getting out of servitude, and arriving home after a long journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I really know about that arriving home after a long journey because I've just had to go to Koh Samui twice. And boy, it sure is a whole lot better to be home than it is to be on the way home.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that's what hindrances are like because the hindrances want us to go someplace.
I gotta be somewhere else.
Yeah, someplace in the past, someplace in the future, someplace on
Anywhere
this
but
map
here.
of the, anywhere but here. Exactly. That's why the Buddha put that in there. But you can also see the idea of being
Right.
well rather than being sick is really an important aspect. But one of them that I like a lot about is debt, because debt, in fact, is really wrapped up with doubt as well as being on a journey. Because when we're on a journey, we don't feel safe, not really safe.
Yeah.
We begin to feel safe on a journey once we've made that same journey over and over, back and forth, and now we're seeing it through direct knowledge that the journey is not so dangerous. But
Right.
if you've ever been someplace you've never been before, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Trepidation, fear, doubt, all of that has to do with being out traveling.
It helps
But the
to
saint,
take on the mindset that it's a fun little exploration, both figuratively and
ah,
literally.
exactly so. So that's one of the things that I do and practice actually intentionally is to smile at everybody I see while I'm on a journey.
And see what happens. Most of the time they smile back.
In Thailand, everybody does.
Everybody
And
speaks that language.
yes, everybody does. In fact, the word Siam, I think, means the land of smiles.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so the other one was that I was going to mention is doubt. I mean, debt, because debt and doubt are really wrapped up together. That being free from debt is a real relief
Yeah, and
because being
when
is
you're in
dangerous.
debt, there's this sense of how the hell am I ever gonna get out of this? What am I gonna do? And doubt is the same way.
Hmm. Exactly. And so these hindrances that the Buddha had with these actual analogies really begin to see why it is, in fact, such a relief to be free from them, to be
Mm-hmm.
free from debt, and be free from illness, and to be free from jail, and be free from servitude. And I see the word servitude in the sense of we are in service to some business or society or organization and that we're paid with a paycheck, and so that's our entire material existence
Yeah.
is wrapped up with that servitude, and that being free from service so that I don't have to do anything. And in fact, that's one of the cures that I find when that momentary anxiety just comes up for something, is I can tell myself, I got nothing to do. Got nothing to do. Nobody wants anything. Nobody wants nothing. And I don't have to do anything for anybody. I am free for this moment. No service.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And so beginning to think that way, because in fact, that's the kind of thought that we need, because at that point when that feeling of anxiety or the thoughts of anxiety come up, we can say, oh, never mind.
It's just anxiety.
Just,
This is the way it is.
yeah, take a breath, enjoy. All right.
Yeah,
So,
it, when I get that feeling of anxiety, it's very interesting and strange, almost eerie to watch what happens when I become mindful of it, because the sensations stay there, but they're less unpleasant, and there's almost like a paradoxical meta quality to it, because the unpleasantness becomes less unpleasant. I don't know if I'm explaining myself clearly, but it's like it's like I can become okay with not being okay.
if you can imagine a swimming pool that does have a drain, and the drain is open, but the inflow of the water into the swimming pool is greater than just what's in the pool,
Mm-hmm.
so that the pool feels like it's slowly filling up, even though it's actually being drained away.
Mm-hmm.
And that what happens now is we begin to find a way of controlling that input valve. Now, the way this analogy works here is, imagine that there is a set of chemicals that are being given off by the brain, and the swimming pool itself is the bloodstream, but that the bloodstream does have purification systems working so that it can
Mm-hmm.
and that if we do the right things to keep the drain open and we can stop, then that residual um, adrenaline or whatever it is in the blood that's keeping us in anxiety is actually now on the wane, and it goes down, and we can recognize that it's going down. And both of those, I think, have a lot to do with the breath, especially that out breath, is to start throwing things that are in the lungs and in the blood out of the body, as well
Mm-hmm.
as cutting off that inflow by having a different thought. So whatever it was, and in fact, let's use the
A
example of,
compassionate thought always helps.
oh, you break up. Say again.
What I s- you said you can stop the inflow or control the
Mhm.
inflow by having a different thought, and I interrupted and said a compassionate thought always seems to help. As in self-compassion, having compassion for myself for being in that state.
Yes, that's excellent. Another one would be a happy thought or a humorous thought. And in fact, they can both be blended together, so a thought can be both a compassionate and humorous at the same time. With and an example of that would be, "Oh, poor me! Oh, poor me!" And that takes it both. But going back to the one that I said that I was using, so imagine that you have the image of a person, and immediately the thought about an email, and I owe her an email, and then the
Mhm.
anxiety starts up.
Yeah.
And we catch that anxiety, even though we've seen the sequence of events. And all of this happened, by the way, within a second.
Yeah.
But we see that anxiety immediately. We don't just start thinking about, oh, well, what am I going to put in that email? And gosh, I don't really want to do it. And you can hear how all of that is draining right into dukkha, coming inflow, while the
Yeah.
anxiety is building up. But if we can catch that anxiety just as it pops in, that's when we can turn it off by changing the thought. And the thought that you were changing would be like the for me, another example of is that she doesn't want to read my emails because she really doesn't. Not what I have to say.
Oh.
And so with that, we can put an end to this anxiety. And that's exactly the right way of practice, because in fact, what we've done is we've seen the suffering, we know what it's like, and we know how to get rid of it. And so the Eightfold Noble Path is built right into still that same 1, 2, 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going to pay close attention. Wise attention is always going to be paid on some aspect of the Eightfold Noble Path. And by doing that, we come out of personality view. We stop being so selfish. Doubts are eliminated. The way society works, we can see right through that. All those, what's called in Pali, the Sila Bhatta Paramasa, you can see the word Sila in it. Sila Bhatta Paramasa means, and in fact, the Buddha lists us at one of the four modes of clinging, that we cling to rites, rules, and rituals. And the big dude that we cling to is the dude of karma, the law of karma. If I do the right thing, I'm going to get the right results, and that don't happen all the time. A
Yeah.
lot of suffering built into that. So we have to recognize what laws are really worth following, because most of the laws don't work, or at best they're only mundane right view and not super mundane right view. And that's when we stumble on, oh, well, I've got the answer to that question. I know exactly which rule system to follow, and that's dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. That's the path.
To stop taking anything seriously is generally a good rule to follow.
Ah, yes, yes. Everything is joyful,
Mm-hmm.
but that takes practice. It's a skill to be developed.
Well, it's fun practice. I'm okay with
Yep.
it. It's fun. I'll
Yeah,
have fun.
exactly so. Exactly so. Exactly right.
Okay, well, before we go, would you mind talking about how to access the recorded videos?
Yes, after you sign off and wait 1 to 5 minutes, a square box will show up. And that square box, if you click it, it will play the video. Or if you click the three vertical bars beside to the right of the video, it'll bring down a menu where you can see download or save as.
Is there any way to see other people's videos that you've recorded?
Yes, there are more than 100 videos now on YouTube.
Okay, so they're all on YouTube, or the ones I can access are on YouTube?
Yes,
Okay, gotcha. All right, that makes it simple.
yes, they're on YouTube. All you have to do is search for Dhammarato.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I really appreciate the talk, and I will call you back when something else comes up that I need clarification on, or just when I feel like talking.
Okay, all right. Start delving into those Four Noble Truths one at a time. You should be able to have questions about each one of the four of them, especially that second Noble Truth, because it's a dingbat.
Mm-hmm.
It goes all the way down to the depths of how the mind works.
So, just to make sure I'm clear on this, the second noble truth is the cause of suffering.
Precisely.
Okay, just making sure. And do you mean to investigate these on the level of thought or on the level of seeing it in the moment?
The, Let us
On
put
a
it
level.
this way, the quicker the better. If you can see it within 5 seconds, that's good. If you can take it down to 4, that's even better. Down to 2 seconds, right. Be right there with it, and that's the ding, 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 ding. All right, see that stuff as it happens.
Okay. Oh, and that reminds me actually, something else I've been meaning to mention. This is something that's been going well, not a question that I have, but I'm sure you're quite familiar with Chuladasa and his book, The Mind Illuminated. In the end of it, one of the appendices, he describes a practice called the mindful review, And essentially, you just sit down at the end of the day and think about what was the most skillful and most unskillful thing I did all day. What were my intentions at the moment? What were the results or potential consequences? And what can I do differently next time? And I've been finding that practice immensely helpful.
Okay.
Just a fun fact. I don't know. Just thought I'd share.
All right. No, I'll take that in. My comment would be, why wait all day?
Well, just because sometimes you don't catch it in the moment, although that would be the goal.
Right. Okay. So I understand that he's saying it all day as a beginner's practice to
Mm-hmm.
get you
Yes.
started. All right.
And I've
But you
noticed it
can
also helps me become more vigilant to my patterns because, say, I wake up tomorrow and I'm doing the same old thing that I thought about in the mindful review last night, I could say, oh, I'm doing it again.
exactly so. Excellent. Excellent. Great. I'm glad to hear that's working for you.
Yeah.
I really like it when I hear from students success like this. So I'm really glad that you called. I'm feeling good now. I had a terrible day today until you called. Teasing.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could help turn it around.
All right. Well, we'll see you later. Okay.
I'll see you later. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.